Welcome to the Blaney Philosophy Podcast. For this week's election year show, we have a special guest, writer, mentor, and international business manager, H. Anthony Ribadeneira. He's here to share his insights on why the U.S. election system is not meant to respond to the average citizen and how we can change that. He is hopefully going to give us some very insightful answers on why it is we vote, why we have this structure in place, what's wrong with the system, and how things can be fixed. So Anthony, it seems like a simple task. I think you should be able to answer that and more today. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Tommy, for having me. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here. And might I add, I promise you I will solve all of our nation's problems in these 20 minutes.
I love the confidence. We're going to the polls today. We're going to place our votes. Everybody's fairly represented. Everything is on the up and up. There's no big money interest. There's no things that are difficult to understand going on behind the scenes. That's correct, right? We can all agree on that.
So, Tommy, I know you're playing your character here because, to be honest with you, I know you're way smarter than I
But that is what they told me in second grade, and I believe it.
Tommy, you are a good student. Before I speak, Tommy, I just want to let you know, I would like to let the audience know that, I have my own voting preferences. I'll get it out there. I'm a registered Republican. I haven't voted Republican in 14 years. This is not what I would want to talk about in the sense of Democrat versus Republican. Any questions you might ask me, Tommy, I'm going to tell you up front, they're going to be on the structures of the system.
What comes to mind, Anthony, is when I was reading up on my Greek philosophy, as I do in my free time, talk about the hierarchy and that there has to be some central control and not the masses just take until there's nothing left and then our system just breaks down and folds in on itself. Why do we have to have these big money interests, or why do we have to have industries that have big interests?
No, that's a great question. In fact, Tommy, what you're asking is questions that have been visited since at least 400 years and probably into ancient Greek times. So I'll give you the quick answer to that. Going along the philosophy perspective that you touched on, right, there's Hobbes. He was a British philosopher, political philosopher. And what Hobbes says is essentially the world is short, brutish, mean, and you're not going to live very long because everybody wants to kill you, right? And so you need what he calls a Leviathan. Essentially, just like in the Bible, the Leviathan is a giant whale, right? He says there has to be some overarching political authority that's the Leviathan that makes sure that you don't kill me because you like my car, or I don't kill you because I like your wife, or whatever it is. That's what Hobbes would say, right? Locke comes along about 50 years later or so, and that's what our Constitution in the U.S. is based mostly on John Locke. John Locke says, well, no, it's not that things are based on, whether somebody wants to kill themselves or not. They're actually based on whether you're going to protect something. And that something is usually freedom, right? We're talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of, and usually it's property, at least in the U.S. Mm-hmm. That's what John Locke would say is the point of the government, right? So Hobbes says it's to protect you from how crazy it is. Locke says it's to protect your life, liberty, and property.
We need strong leaders. What sets our leaders apart from the strongman dictators that we have in other parts of the world, and we say this is so wonderful that we have a democracy here and we don't have that? Are there things in common in all of these governments around the world? That's more human nature behind what happens, and not that we have the better structure.
So that's a great question again, Tommy. What you're touching on is essentially, I believe his name was Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. He wrote a book called The Dictator's Handbook. And there's actually a great YouTube video. I implore your listeners to listen to it. It's called The Rules for Rulers. Basically, what he's explaining is that there's very little difference between a democracy and a dictatorship, in the sense that the need for, authorizing power, executing things, whether it's building a bridge or, discovering a gold mine, whatever it is, all that is the same. The only thing that's different is the tools to power, what I think Bueno de Mesquita calls the keys to power, right? In other words, how do you make this happen? Your dictator has his Secretary of Defense or whatever it is. He might appoint the Secretary of Defense in a dictatorship, not so much because this guy is like super good on defense, but because he has the allegiance of the military, right? So the military is going to follow him, and he's a key to power, so you make him Secretary of Defense. And you pay him handsomely because he then has to pay others handsomely to make sure that they stay aligned to him. How is that different from a democracy like ours? Is it? Right? So you have the president comes into power in the United States and he makes sure that his constituents get what they think they want. And so that becomes a separate conversation, Tommy, that we can touch on. Actually, what people want versus what they need or what they really want, that's a different conversation. But at least there is that semblance of idea that the rep or the president or the senator says, I'm going to get you what you want, hence why we vote today.
That seems like the people can have a lot of power in that system if they are keeping engaged in it and knowing who's been given the power and what influence is being given to the people up the chain.
Yes, in theory, no in practice. So what I mean by that is, yes, the people have the power, like you say, Tommy. Ultimately, in a democracy, it's supposed to be one man or one woman, one vote, right? In practice, from the very beginning in this country, and far more, as time has gone on, and especially as we've grown very large to the scale of an empire, really, it's become, how do we excise that power more and more from the people and concentrate it in fewer hands? The U.S. has done that very well by equating voting and power with money. So we all know, for instance, cases like Citizen United, right? It's a big case in the U.S. that everyone has a view on it or not. I'm not going to touch on the views. The reality of the case is the following. Corporations can fund committees, what's called the political action committees, called the PAC, with however much money they want to get their voice out, because corporations are people. End of story, right? That means that me, Anthony, when you say, why do I go vote, right? I'm going to say, because I want to affect change. I have one vote. GE Corporation, on the other hand, could and does fund millions of dollars, for instance, to say, you should go vote for Tommy. Now, how many people are going to hear Anthony on this podcast? Maybe 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
But GE is going to reach millions on CNBC and NBC and Fox News and CNN. And so really what it's saying is a case like, and it's not just a Citizens United case. I don't want to keep this political. Just in general, what the country is saying essentially is, the more money you have, by definition, by extension, the more say you have in getting somebody elected. This also applies for unions, for instance. Like, just to keep a balance left and right, unions can also gather this power. In practice, of course, this country tends to have more money concentrated in corporations than unions. But that's a separate conversation. The fact is, any large organization can fund unlimited a voice, a point of view, an elect, that's when you get the commercials that say, for instance, I'm Tommy Blaney and I approve this message. Because legally, that's like the little key that had to be thrown in that says, you can get as much money as you want, just you can't do it, but somebody else can do it in your name. You just have to say it's in your name. That's the only quote-unquote check to the system.
I like what you're saying, and at the same time, I'm torn by it, because as an individual, I can try to do what I can, but then if I join forces with somebody, then we can accomplish a lot more. Encouraging people, hey, build a small team. Let's build a bigger organization. Let's pool our interests together, whether that goes to filling potholes in our neighborhood, putting in speed bumps, to making sure that the school lunches are healthy. Those are really good strategies to have. So now it seems maybe we've gone overboard to the point where now we have these interest groups, let the horse out of the barn, and now we're trying to chase it, saying, well, no, we wanted you to organize, we wanted to have a strong society where everybody has a vote and they can affect change, but now we have too much of that. People have professionalized it and made it into too much sophistication involved in this process.
Tommy, that's exactly the issue. So when you say that they've institutionalized it and professionalized it, that's exactly what's happened in this country. So you have senators, representatives, elected people, and I'm not blaming them. I'm not going to say here that they're bad. So hear me out. Their job, like all of ours job, is to not be on the street, like Hobbes would say, trying to fight for their meal, right? Trying to kill somebody to eat. That they're trying to avoid that at all costs. Well, in this country, with no term limits, with unlimited campaign donations, and with this 3 times removed system of democracy, you can have people institutionalized that have secure jobs essentially for 20, 30, 40 years, however long they want it many times. that are well-paying. They have respect in the sense of power, right? Whether you respect the senator or not, you still have to go grovel to him if you want some kind of a project approved, and with amazing healthcare, amazing retirement benefits, right? So why wouldn't you want this job? You could probably make more in the private industry, but you get left on the side of the road. Corporations are much more like dictatorships. If you don't perform, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
In this system, it's really sweet for about 536 people in government that get to have essentially a perpetuated bread, if you will, bread situation. Now, how does this happen? Bruce Bueno de Mesquita would say, there's keys to power, and you have to influence certain people with something. That's usually some kind of reward. In a dictatorship, it's outright money, right? Here's $1 million, you support me. In a democracy, it's, oh, you work for Goldman Sachs, right? And you want this law passed that says, it's 10% tax rate instead of 28% on all bond investments. This kind of stuff happens. And so Goldman Sachs gives, for instance, $5, $10, $20 million to such and such party, usually both parties, by the way. And both parties make sure, whoever's in power, that law gets passed. And then everyone is crazy and complaining why it is that we have crappy roads, why it is that the Board of Ed situation that you just talked about, because there's not enough money. Well, how is there not enough money? There's not enough money because special interests on both sides of the aisle are getting more and more of the money, which leaves less and less for the average person. This is why most representatives, if not all representatives in government, do not want to pass the following: elimination of private funds in public elections, because then you disconnect the power, the money donors, from the people that get the power, the representatives, from the real source of the power, which should be the people.
Is it possible to be somebody in office that says, I'm just going to do what's right for quote unquote America or my constituents? It seems as if we're looking at the special interest groups, those are the people going in and they're telling the representative, these are the problems. And then there's a lot of people who are silent, who may not have any interest, but then the representative has to go out and seek them out and say, this is what's going to be best. Well, it seems like it's an easy way to be responding to who's at your door, who's got the pile of money, who's saying, if we get this done, this is going to help your district. It seems as if it's the easy way out for the representative.
Yes, I think that's exactly what's going on, Tommy. So again, you hit the nail on the head in the sense that never underestimate the power of people to be lazy. That's one big thing you should always keep in mind. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I don't mean it as in a bad way that somebody's doing something wrong. We're busy, right? We have families, we have this, we have that. It's much harder to elect based on thinking. In other words, is this representative or senator really looking out for my interests? The fact that they're getting half or more, usually more, of their funding for campaigns coming from Silicon Valley and Wall Street, is that really in my interest? Will that candidate pass laws to make sure that my house isn't taken away because of some technicality in the bond structure or whatever it is, right? Whether I paid back or there's a lot of that. There was a lot of that going on in 2008. Is that even possible? And what I would say is no. And it's not just me. You can do a YouTube search on this. There's a lot of great people on there. There's a Harvard professor. I believe his name is Lawrence Lessig. He did a great TED Talks on this. This is a known issue, which is if you have special interests, like you just said, it doesn't have to be an against me thing. It's just a special thing. Because special interest, campaign funding, private funding, and things like Citizens United and all these other things, they're band-aids to the real issue. The real issue is that the people don't have direct power. Now, I'm not saying a direct democracy would necessarily work in the U.S., right? We have 325 million people. It would be tough. I lived in Switzerland. I've seen a more direct version of a direct democracy, so I have an idea. But what we have today is essentially, I need to reach the most amount of people, and the only way I can do that is with money, and the only way I can get that is by appealing to a very, very select small group of people. And I believe in 2014, the numbers were 400 families provided half of the funding, all campaign funding. So we're talking about the Waltons, we're talking about the Zuckerbergs, we're talking about those guys are providing the seed money that gets Tommy's great ideas about the lunch lady and all the other stuff in front of 20 million people. And Anthony's ideas of whatever, no one hears about.
The common man doesn't have a voice. We see the system we have. What can we do to change this?
So first thing, Tommy, is we need to make sure that we explain, and by we I mean all of us explain to ourselves, what is the system in place and why is it in place? The system in place, as we just described, is that folks need a ton of money to reach a lot of people in such a big country to be able to push a certain agenda, whatever it is, whether it's right or left, doesn't matter. That's reality. Why is that the case? Well, because you need certain power structures in place. This is the hierarchy that you mentioned earlier, right? You just need kind of a boss and somebody to follow them, and that's how you build bridges, that's how you build governments. That's kind of natural. Some philosophers would say it's not, but I think for all intents and purposes, most Americans would say that's natural. Okay. But the difference is who elects those power structures, why, and how. And what I would say is it's a lot easier if you're a rep or a senator or a president to appeal to 20 interest groups, right? Homeowners, old people, farmers, Wall Street, Silicon Valley. It's a lot easier to talk to them that way. And Bruce, one of the Mesquita, talks about this in his book. It's a lot easier to talk to those groups as opposed to 30 million homeowners and 10,000 Silicon Valley CEOs or whatever it is. Because then you have to make different promises. You have to dole out different favors. It becomes really unwieldy. It's a lot easier to say, just vote for me. I'm running on the 7th district or whatever it is, because I'm going to pass laws to cut taxes, right? As me as an individual, I can tell you, Tommy, and I think most people in this country would agree, cutting taxes does not help them. Because what would really help them, for instance, is being able to have the healthcare they need when they fell and broke their leg, or being able to not lose their home because they didn't pay a mortgage in 3 months or whatever it is. There's real issues that can be helped with money, but that will not be there because those special interests make sure it doesn't happen. And I'm not saying the special interests are bad, by the way. I'm just saying the current system in place caters to blocks of interest as opposed to the people. So when you say, how can we fix that? Simple. I shouldn't say simple. It's not going to be simple, but the idea is simple. You remove private funding from public elections.
So how does that happen?
So in practicality, so this is a bit of an Anthony idea, right? But there are really good bills out there that have already been proposed, just nobody sponsors them in Congress. We can get to that in a moment. But my thought process is simple. If the people want representation that represents them, they should pay for it. We should pay for it. That can be paid by the intake that the government takes. Every corporation that files taxes pays 0.5% more. Every poor person that gets $4,000 credit back because it's a special child credit or whatever it is gets $3,990 because they also had to pay the 0.5%. Mm-hmm. Everybody pays into this system. Then there's a public pool that gets indexed every election cycle based on inflation or whatever it is. And that pays for the campaigns. So then you say, well, who gets to run? Well, you could do something like, an internet survey system that says, here are 100 candidates, right? And here's their issues that they're running on. Who gets the signature? So Tommy gets 400,000 or 1 million or however it is. This would have to get structured out as a common policy. But what I'm saying is you can get people on a ballot that way and say, okay, these 10 made the threshold. They get campaign funding.
What sounds like you're saying is who wears out more shoe leather.
Could be.
and as opposed to who collects more big donors.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the sense that if I give you good ideas, because see, this is how it helps. It helps because instead of just listening to a TV commercial that says Tommy Blaney that ran for the 4th district, molested children when he was 14. Do you want him around your kids? Totally not true. But those are the ads you're seeing now in New Jersey and stuff running. Even if it were true, how does that help you? It's a lot easier to rely on feelings. How do you feel about this guy? This guy's a molester, or this guy was, he was charged with such and such. Even if he wasn't convicted, he was charged. So I feel he must be a crook. Therefore, I won't vote, right? I'm not saying these guys, you should vote for them or not. That's not my point. My point is, in a real democracy, you would have to have informed voters that say, okay, that previous guy was never convicted for molesting, and he's actually trying to pass a law that gives me health care. And maybe that's what I care about. So then I can vote for him because it's an informed vote. But neither side, and this is a Republican and Democratic problem, neither side wants that because it's a lot easier to vote for your gut.
I like the direction you're going in because This is an elephant or a bear or a whale of a problem. Pick one of the above.
A Leviathan.
A Leviathan
As
is
Hobbes
a
would say, yeah.
Leviathan of a problem. You're directing me to the beginning of the campaign when the person says, I want to get involved, I want to help my community, I want to do something good. Right from that step, you're proposing some changes rather than saying, let's reform XYZ industry or this interest.
At step
Make
one, it
that-
becomes, at step one, it would become, am I being responsive to the people? And an elect or a candidate will not ask this of the kindness of their heart. They'll say they will. They'll pay lip service. This is why,
I do think that there are a lot of people that say, okay, it's day one of my campaign.
Right.
I'm going to do some good.
and then what happens?
Then they look at how the system is set up and they say, I can either drop out on day one or I can start participating in the system. I'm a small fish in the big pond.
And the participation usually runs, and I forget his name, but somebody in Congress told some other congressperson, they said, when in doubt, lean green. Okay? And lean green is not the, and I think somebody clarified in this said, and it's not environmentalism. Okay? That's exactly what happens, Tommy. And you have this, and it's always generational, right? You have these people that say, I'm going to vote for Obama or whatever it is, and he's going to change the world. And then those changes don't happen, and then people get mad at him or mad at her or whoever the candidate is. The reason, and part of the reason why is because there's such a large electorate and you can't promise everything to everybody. That's true. That's always going to be true. But the big fish, the big whale, as you described, is that people have to get that money to get the voice, to become the candidate, even before they become the phenom, even before they become like the Trump phenom or whatever it is. They have to get that initial seed, which means they have to promise something. And in this country, thanks to Citizens United and really a longer history, it becomes whoever has the money has the voice. So who has the money? And as we've seen, there's actually studies on this. 400 families elect with their dollars. Who gets their dollars? And those are the candidates we get to choose. You know who else does that? China does that. China does it in Hong Kong. They say you can vote for whoever you want. Right? This is the Tammany Hall, New York Tammany Hall version of you can vote for whoever you want as long as I pick the candidates. That's what these 400 families are doing.
So we just have to keep hoping that we get somebody in there that is the one that can change everything, that's going to stand up to the system. Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and it'll all work out, hopefully.
You can try that, Tommy, or what you could
I don't know. I'm searching for the silver lining on this, or the bright spot that we can look at here.
There's a huge silver lining, Tommy, but I don't know if it's going to get followed, and it's the following. You could hope and pray that something will change, or you could say in your Facebook page, in your Twitter feed, writing, calling, in the town meetings, and in every outlet that you can think of, that you can interact. First of all, you have to care. That's part of the problem, is that people don't care, and I don't blame them, because there's this lack of representation. So there's going to have to be a seed of caring. Like, I'm going to go and write this email. I'm going to send this mail. I'm going to make this phone call. I'm going to go to the town meeting. There's no way around that. That's the beauty of our system. Do that. And at every meeting, at every contact point, you say to your rep, to your candidate, you say, is there or will you sponsor a bill removing private funding from public elections? You will see that candidate. If it's a first-time candidate, they'll pay all the lip service. They'll say exactly, there's actually a bill. We're talking about a bill by now. Yeah, you keep talking about it.
Things are going to change until I'm in power.
Exactly. Things won't change until you send me there. The incoming guy is going to say, that's a great point. And then he's going to go off in his own little candidate magic that they spin and say something else. They're going to end up talking about how they helped the bridge or something. If everyone keeps pushing this, eventually they're going to realize that's the issue everyone cares about. And I will say this, the reason why that's the issue you should care about is because that's the first issue. Once democracy is responsive to the people, then the people will be able to send reps in there that do what they want. And this is whether outside of left or right. If the people decide that we want to be the super nationalistic army gun-toting country that invades other countries, fine. It's what the country wants. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. We can talk about that after. Mm-hmm. But at least it reflects the will of the people. Right now, Most governing in this country does not reflect the will of the people. It reflects keeping the system in place because it guarantees what we talked about in the beginning of the show, people with long-term jobs, great situations, power, and a hereditary say on what goes on in this country. The most powerful country in the world, by the way.
It does seem like there's a lot of work that needs to be done to change things. But in the meantime, we need to get out and vote. We need to exercise that power and hold on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, for my part, not only do I reach out, I think you might have seen, Tommy, we're friends on Facebook. You probably see that I pester Jim Himes and Chris Murphy, who are my representatives here in the Connecticut area. No matter what they post, whether they're visiting old people, I'll say that's fantastic, you're visiting old people, but what is your idea on removing private funding from public elections? I never get a response, by the way. And they do respond to other comments, but they don't respond to those comments. That gives you an idea of where their position is on this. What I'm also doing currently is writing a book. I'm actually working on 2 books. I'm wrapping up my first book and I'm going to start my second. Both books deal with a state of the world where either this exists or doesn't exist. So the one that right now doesn't exist is the one I'm finishing up, and it's an international political thriller. The next book that I'm going to write is with a backdrop of if some of this stuff was actually in place, if the government was responsive to the people, how might that world look? Now, it's going to have a different storyline, of course, but that's going to be the backdrop to it. We can do things like that. Whether you're a writer, however you're creative, you can make the issue, which is government responsive to me and why not? And as we've spoken today, we would all agree, I think, it's not, because it's not supposed to be in the current system. It's supposed to be responsive to money. So what can we do to remove that? And I would argue, reach out to your congressman, reach out to your senator, reach out to your president and say, when will you or how will you or have you sponsored any kind of bill or law or executive action that says remove private funding from public elections, and see what they say.
Speaking of reaching out, where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, yeah, sure. So anybody can find me on LinkedIn. I'm a lion. Yeah, it's called a lion, I believe it. LinkedIn, Facebook, you can certainly find me on Facebook. We'll post on the link. We'll post on the...
Put in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly, the links.
Thank you so much for sharing your ideas on our system and laying out the cold, hard facts of what the challenges are that we're up against. Hopefully we can start on a path to making things better.
I hear the hopefulness in your voice, Tommy.
I am. I do believe a lot in the system of... I think about the guys who went to the beaches of Normandy and Iwo Jima, and they sacrificed everything so we could have an opportunity on a Tuesday morning or afternoon or evening to go out and pull a few levers and participate in this system. That's a great
point, Tommy. Could you imagine, just before we go, could you imagine if that guy dying on the Normandy beach, right, he's bleeding out, and some angel or something just comes and whispers in his ear and shows him what we're doing today, that we prefer to stay home and not vote because because our electors are not responsive to us. Could you imagine what that poor guy would think?
Yeah, somebody doesn't want to go out in the rain.
Yeah.
All right, well, that wraps up our episode. Thanks so much, Anthony, again, for coming in. Check Anthony out on the social media links I'll post in the show notes.